Hi everyone. I want to continue this discussion of problems in the 1970s. So there are all those economic issues that are happening, but there are some additional changes. And then I also want to focus a bit on Carter. So just to let you know, this is a little bit of an eclectic little video as I'm focusing on some different things from the 70s. So one of the things that really picks up power and support in the 1970s, both in Western Europe and in the US, is the environmental movement. And basically, that's because by the 1970s, it is pretty clear that there are some major problems. So this is a time period in which there is increasing air pollution, and there's an understanding of the problems with asthma and other issues that are caused by that. There's horrific water pollution, because this is a period where a lot of industrial waste still is just flowing into rivers and into the ocean. There's a belief that we're running out of forests as just kind of the clear cutting is happening. There's increasing loss of species that are happening. And so basically there's the issue that something needs to happen, that there are finite natural resources. Yes, the ocean can become polluted. Maybe there won't always be clean water. We're beginning to lose all these species of animals, and so something needs to happen. Now, in Europe, you actually begin to see the rise of green parties. So these are political parties that have at its core a focus on environmental concerns. In the United States, of course, we don't quite see that, but in both the Republicans and the Democrats, there will be people who are really into the issues of conservation and environmental change. And so there begins to be legislation, both within Western Europe and the US, to begin to focus on conservation, on recycling, which actually in the you just didn't do that in the 70s, but you began to see that. And this is the rise of the organic food movement, especially a concern with the amount of pesticides that is found in food. And there's a focus on renewable energy that begins. So not simply conserving energy, but finding alternative sources, especially water power, wind power that is renewable. And there's a focus on, or calls on the government to regulate industry, especially heavily polluting industries, that you are not just going to have the owners of major industries just do this, which means that you're going to need to pass a whole bunch of legislation in order to force industries to monitor and to protect the environment. Okay, now I'm going to do this real shift. Now, this is all going to tie together, I promise. But another thing that's happening in the United States and not in Europe in the 1970s is the rise of the religious right. So these are social conservatives. And in many ways, this makes some sense that you would begin to see the rise of social conservatives. I mean, social conservatives have existed before. But there's been so much change in the 1950s and 60s that there begins to be a pushback. And so the religious right, primarily by religious right, this is evangelical Christians, is the idea that government could be a way to advance or to protect traditional ideas, special social ideas about how people function and their roles in society. So ironically, although these are conservatives, social conservatives, they're not conservatives necessarily in terms of small government. They see the government as a way to protect traditional ideas. So in the 1970s, the social conservatives and the religious right are arguing for things like prayer in schools, which has been deemed unconstitutional. They are pushing for traditional roles for women as primarily wives and mothers. One of the things that crisis in the 70s, as wages have disappeared, as stagflation is happening, as wages are definitely not keeping up with inflation, is that you're seeing more and more women entering the workforce because the working class cannot survive on a single income. And so there's this pushback as well by the social conservatives. But we've also seen just those changing norms in the 50s and 60s as well. There's a significant concern about increasing drug abuse. So the 70s are a period of increasing drug use and also the accompanying issues with that. And just general changes in kind of norms and functionings in society. So this is going to tie to Jimmy Carter. So in 1976, Ford is defeated and Jimmy Carter comes in as the new president. So he's president from 1977 to 1981. Now he is going to try to fix that stagflation crazy thing. His government, they're going to do the best they can, but like most countries, we're not able to fix that. And so we're going to continue to have high inflation and a job market that's not expanding. So he's not going to be successful with that. But the other thing that happens here is that he had really gotten the support of the religious right, of the evangelical Christians, the social conservatives, because he is a Southern Baptist Christian. And he was very open about the fact that he was a born-again Christian and things like that. And so we saw the religious right vote very Democrat. And the idea here, the hope, was that Jimmy Carter would enact a lot of social legislation, and he would also appoint conservatives to the Supreme Court. He actually, on the whole, does not do that. And that's going to be really important because the religious right, the moral majority, at the next presidential election, the one that happens in 1980, are going to switch Republican. And on the whole, they have stayed Republican. So in the 1970s, then, the religious right is voting Democrat. They see the Democrats as more representing them, and then we'll shift to the right, to the religious conservatives on the whole voting more Republican, and that has remained in play. Another aspect that Carter has to deal with is foreign policy. Now, he very much continues this idea of détente that you've read about, this idea of trying to negotiate and talk and create treaties with the Soviet Union because of the fact the last thing that we need is to have a nuclear war. And that's been, of course, a policy of both Republicans and Democrats in the 70s. But we're going to have the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Now, I talk about that from the Soviet side in a different lecture, but from the American side, that's important because it's seen in the United States as very aggressive. Remember, the U.S. is always worried about the spread of communism, and here we have a country that has just become communist, Afghanistan, and in 1979, the Soviets coming in to support the communist government of Afghanistan. And there's a huge push in the United States for Carter to take a hard line against the Soviet Union. And so that's going to really kind of undermine things. Another thing that becomes somewhat controversial for Carter is his focus on the human rights record of our U.S. allies. He basically says you can't look at the world strictly in a Cold War mentality, that anyone who hates communists is going to be an ally of the United States. And because of the fact that we are supporting leaders like the Shah of Iran, who are just horrible dictators. But in a Cold War mentality, that was okay because of the fact that the major enemy is the Soviet Union. So his kind of beginning to call out U.S. allies who have horrible human rights records was considered controversial and taking the eye off the ball of the Soviet Union, which had just invaded Afghanistan and is the major problem. The other thing that happens right at the end of his time in power in 1979 is the overthrow of the Shah of Iran and the Iranian Revolution. So the Shah had run an awful regime with horrible human rights records. There's a rise and he is overthrown. Now, he actually wants to come, the Shah wants to come to the U.S. to get medical treatment, and Carter allows that. At that point in time, we get the Iranian hostage crisis. So what happens is a group of, well, a lot of them are university students, go and take the U.S. embassy in Tehran and demand that the U.S. hand over the Shah to be returned to Iran to stand trial. Well, no, the U.S. is just not going to do that. And so what happens here for 444 days is that there are U.S. embassy personnel who are held hostage in Tehran. And Carter and administration just is not able to move out of this. They can't force the Iranians to hand over the U.S. hostages. They do release some of them. There's an attempted kind of special forces attempt, and that doesn't work. It's just a mess. So at the end of the 1970s in the United States, things seem relatively bleak. The economy is not doing very well. For many people, we're at this kind of crisis, and some people arguing for additional rights, more rights for women. The gay rights movement is beginning. For other people, there seems to be this abandoning of traditional values, a real concern about the lack of growth in churches and that type of thing. And then on top of that, the perception that America is maybe weak or not as respected internationally as she's been in the past. So as the United States moves towards the 1980 presidential election, people are really looking for someone who has the answers to these problems, the answers to the economic problems, and also who hopefully can kind of restore pride in the U.S. and hopefully be able to really have a more dominant or forceful foreign policy, because we are one of the world's superpowers, and that needs to be reflected in a growing economy, in a vibrant culture, and in a strong foreign policy.